Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for your testimony. Someone had offered an analogy of airline analogy earlier, and as I've looked at and read through and tried to synthesize this Commission's recommendations, if I applied the Commission's recommendations to the airline industry, essentially with one plane crash we would shut down all airplanes and frankly all airports. I apologize for being late. I was in a workforce hearing and I had an opportunity to question Governor McDonnell from Virginia, and specifically my questions were about the impact of the administration's response in shutting down offshore as a result of this. And the fact, here's some of the statistics and I'll be quick with this and I have my questions. He indicated that this industry would create more than 1,900 new jobs just in Virginia, increase the state's gross domestic product by $365 million annually, and generate approximately $19.48 billion in federal, state, and local revenues. Senator Graham, Secretary Riley, page 2 of your testimony states, quote, "But most of the mistakes and oversights at Macondo can be traced back to a single overarching failure, a failure of management by BP, Halliburton, and Transocean," end quote. And under the key facts, you also stated that the investigation team identified several human errors, engineering mistakes, and management failures. Based on those statements, a logical person would conclude it wasn't the lack of adequate science and engineering, but the proper application of science and engineering by those on the rig that resulted in the Deepwater Horizon Macondo tragedy. Basically, yes or no, do you agree with that conclusion?
Well, I think it was part of the responsibility of effective management is to understand the risk and take steps to mitigate the risk. The fact is that there was no effective plan in place or capability to implement a plan before this accident occurred.
So it sounds that you agree it was management.
I think that is a failure of management to do effective risk analysis and take steps to mitigate the risk.
Great, thank you. Secretary, any thoughts?
I would support that. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. On page 7 of your testimony, you state under the headlines of reforming industry safety practices, quote, "Government oversight must be accompanied by oil and gas industry's internal reinvention, sweeping reforms that accomplish no less than a fundamental transformation of its safety culture," end quote. Internal reinvention, sweeping reforms, and fundamental transformation, frankly, of an entire industry is what the implications of this, of the result of these recommendations, frankly, are words of alarm and cast a very wide net. I assume that they're based on a thorough review of the hundreds of companies involved in U.S. energy production, and not just 3 companies, despite how large they are, that were mentioned in the report. Did the Commission conduct such a review?
We conducted a review of the incident itself, of accident data,
your
data
review
throughout the industry.
I think you've answered my question. Your review was of 3 companies out of perhaps thousands.
Well, it's of 79 losses of well control in the last, 20 years or so, affecting a very large number of companies operating in the Gulf.
No, I understand. So the review, frankly, there's 3,500 number I looked at, 3,500 rigs in offshore production and thousands of companies engaged in the production, but the conclusion was really based on looking at 3 companies.
Well, the inferences drawn for the likelihood of entailed risk with those 3 companies largely rest upon what we learned from the experience of those 3 companies, but we had significant data about many other companies and their experiences that caused us to use the term systemic.
And I appreciate, that you're taking that inference from there, but essentially inference are drawn from 3 companies, but frankly casting a pretty wide net with your recommendations impacting thousands of companies.
But if I could add to that, you made the allusion to, and I had suggested, if the United States had a 4 fatalities to 1 ratio in airline accidents vis-a-vis, let's say, Norway or the United Kingdom, I believe the American public would be outraged. That is the situation between the North Sea and the Gulf of Mexico.
Well,
and I don't think that one company.
If I can reclaim my time, because I know I'm going to get gavelled out here. I'm new on the committee. I think the American people would also be pretty irate. They would be saddened with the loss of one life on an airplane accident, no doubt about it. And they would be concerned with that airplane crash. But they would also be irate if the federal government essentially shut down the entire airplane industry as opposed to really focusing on drilling down, no pun intended, and systematically determining the root cause of that airplane crash. And I obviously out of time. So
Congressman, neither Senator Graham nor I nor our commission are here to defend the moratorium. Not for a minute.
Very good.